because really I think there's one art tradition, and it's African and it's Asian and it's Western. All of it mixes together, whatever Western means. It's really one tradition of art, and it goes back tens of thousands of years, or not longer. It goes back maybe before humanity. It goes to the Neanderthals and their art that scientists believe that they were making. And so it's like, this is all of our tradition, and we're all in this together. And I don't mean that in a corny, like trying to sell you something during COVID way. I literally mean like this is a shared communal experience. And so now my attitude is very much like wanting to bring people in. You know?
But that's the universality of art. That's an amazing quality. And I mean, the story that you share is so overwhelming, and it makes me so emotional that I hope I'm going to be coherent, because I wanted to ask you a question, which is kind of vague, but it's I'm trying to spiral towards it, because my channel is called Classical Odyssey. The idea came quite naturally because there's no better word to use to describe the art that I'm trying to pursue. And classicism it's quite an abstract term. It's used in many different ways. You have classical education, which generally refers to like learning from the Greek and the Romans and the classical literature and so on and so forth. And then you have the classical Greek period in art, and then the Hellenistic, and classicism has to do with that. But I see that art history is in a way circular, because we always tend to go back to what the Greeks have set up as a standard, which is very interesting. And that was kind of lost or obscured for some ages, and then the Renaissance brought it back, and then we're trying to regain that knowledge and build upon it, because the standards were... And I had this conversation with someone, and then they responded in an interesting way. They said, this sounds really depressive because it sounds like we're not evolving. And it's not about that. It's just about discovering something that is universally true. Yeah. And I think that's the art that you're also pursuing, and that's why so many people relate to it. And in the end, like, I wanted to ask you, how do you define classicism? How do you differentiate between classicism and academicism, or if you feel like you need to make the demarcation?
Yeah, I'm not sure how important the terms are always, because language is such a poor expression of the visual. You know, like a lot of times, like on Discord, I'll type to try to help a student out, or I'll answer a question, and sometimes it's like you have to see it visually. And even if you see it, you have to be able to do it at a certain level. So like what we can perceive is limited by our skill. So our taste is limited by our skill. Now, what we can see when we look at a masterpiece is limited by our own skill. So much of it is like a point of view kind of a thing. But to me, like classicism, I take it a little kind of literally. Like I'm looking at the example that the ancients set, you know, just based on the fragments we have, really within like the ancient Egyptian eras to classical Greek antiquity, Hellenism, and how that spread throughout the East in terms of the origins of like Gandharan Buddhist art and stuff. I see that as, to me, it has to do with a balancing of nature and design, but it's a balance at a very, very high level. And so if you study a Hellenistic sculpture by today's standards, you might be like, oh, you know, well, I actually took Ray Bustos' anatomy class, and I did anatomy tools, and I did this, so I'm going to know. I mean, I've also studied anatomy for 15 years, but just a contemporary person, you think you're more sophisticated than the Greeks because they always do the nose this way. And then you look at the leg and you're like, there's stuff here that Ray Bustos doesn't know. There's stuff here that Elliot Goldfinger doesn't know. There's stuff here that Proko doesn't know. The leading experts who teach anatomy of our time don't know as much as the ancient Greeks, and that blows my mind. That
the thing that they thought proportion mathematically, like they had the heroic proportions, they actually thought it out, the golden ratio. Yeah. It's mind-blowing. They came
I
up
actually
with
did.
it.
I actually did my own Vitruvian. I did my own Vitruvian proportions studies, and I've actually turned that into a class. And you might be able to. You can probably see it on my Instagram. But I've redone some of those same proportional studies that Leonardo did. I'm very interested in like the origins of perspective and in proportion and a lot of these things and how that ties into anatomy. But to me, what the ancient Greeks in particular did at the highest level was this beautiful balance of nature, but not just raw nature, not just looking at anything, but a meta nature where observation of nature over many generations. It's not one. That's the problem with modernism, where if every person has to be a unique voice and my style's got to be unique and my way of, we're all reinventing the wheel. And so I think it's actually the time scale matters very much. And so when you have literally thousands of years of one tradition developing, it's the best ideas from so many generations of artists. And so I don't think an individual artist can ever compete with the quality of a community that is so skilled and focused over such a long period of time.
Yeah, it's a cumulus of knowledge. It's a
Yes.
cumulus of knowledge, and so it's almost like you have to say it. It's kind of arrogant to think that you can reinvent it all over again, start from scratch, and do it better.
Well, let's say it's contemporary, and I think I think in the Renaissance that started. I don't think that's just a modern art problem. I think in some ways the modern art era, depending how you think of it, started with the Renaissance, because they were looking backwards and they were trying to interpret what the Greeks were doing. They were getting mathematics via the Arab and Indian stewardship translated into everyday Italian. So they're getting Fibonacci, and they're like, oh my God, and they're rediscovering Laocoon and these ancient sculptures, and they're like, holy crap, you guys, there was this ancient civilization that was better at us. They had plumbing and we don't have plumbing. They had optics and we don't have optics. Like, they were so much more advanced, and they were so excited, and they're like, mathematics and nature and Christian beautiful medieval design. Like, I love medieval art. I don't see it as a dark period of ignorance.
Not at all.
One of my favorite artists, like my favorite sculptor, one of them is Tillman Riemenschneider. Like, I love that decorative, beautiful, because during medieval times in Europe, the artists were trying to depict not how something looks, but they were trying to depict the essence of that thing. And they were trying to, and so it's not that they were so naive that they couldn't do a perspective scene or they couldn't observe. I mean, the Fayum portraits, the ancient Egyptian portraits, those things look almost contemporary in the way that they're done. So it's not that they couldn't do naturalism. It's that they had different goals in art. And that design and that tradition that they still had, combined with looking backwards and that aspirational trying to up the quality with a love for nature, inventing anatomy. Like, Leonardo invented anatomy the way we know it, and Basilius and Albinus then invented perspective. They invented hatching in the way that we use it today. And so the Renaissance is so interesting because it's looking backwards, but it's also like the birth of the frameworks that we still use today. And so those periods in particular, classical antiquity, because it was the pinnacle and the inspiration for artists up until very recently, it was like the primary inspiration because of the quality of it, because of how good it is, not because of historical coincidence, because of how well done it is. So I think that, but so I would still call the Renaissance, classical in that way, in that they were looking for that balance and they were looking at classical art. Same thing with, even academic, even to Bouguereau and some of these artists they were clearly looking backwards. They were clearly going for those, but the methods changed. And I think as the methods changed and they became more optical and they became less about design and less about imagination and more about observing. So you could say this goes back to, your Del Sartos and your Caravaggios and your Velázquez's and your Vermeers and then the people who are experimenting with optical tools and stuff to record more accurately, and then all the way to your academic and your realists. And I think that the craft, not that the ideals changed so much, but that the craft the process got a little bit pedestrian. It got a little bit, let's make it easier. And so the drawing manuals, first, they don't say use straight lines. You have to learn how to draw a curve, and that's the whole art. Later, they're like, well, it's a little easier if you let the students start with these lines, and then they turn them into curves. And then a little later, it's like, well, grids are really effective. And so I think there became like a popularizing, lowest common denominator. The process got more and more like reliant on observation and stylization rather than invention. And I think when that happened, it got a little bit stale, and it was more ripe to fall because of modernism and obviously Hitler and all the stuff that was going on in the Cold War and all these political things that happened. I think, and then also the end of the monarchy. Like Johanna wrote an article for, I think, the Epoch Times about Charles Lebrun, and he was like this amazing painter who was working probably in the school of Leonardo, but when the monarchy fell and the French Revolution happened, a lot of that art became associated with the royalty and the bourgeoisie, and it was destroyed and torn down. And so I think politics got too involved in the craft. I think it got a little too observational, and I think that the camera, all of these things sort of came to a point where there became this rejection where it's like, okay, we're not going to do classicism anymore. It's out. We're not teaching the plaster cast. We're not even going to teach drawing and painting at most universities. Instead, it's about the concept, right? Because the camera is better at us than at painting. It's not. That was a foolish mistake. They were confused. But the camera is better at this. So let's just embrace the design part, but not even try to make it look like anything. Let's really distort it. Let's see how far we can push it. Let's see how far we can take it apart. And then it got. And so I don't like that direction. I don't like Kandinsky's book. I don't think it makes any sense. Yeah. So I think it was a little bit of an experimental, traumatic thing that happened. But unfortunately, a lot of that craft, the traditional craft, the stuff that I love so much, I think it got watered down and it got lost and it got fragmented. And so to me, it's a little bit of a tragedy that happened. Although I don't want to live in a world without experimentation and without contemporary modern art. I like a lot of that stuff.
The point is to find the golden balance, right? And sorry for interrupting. The point is just to find the golden balance, which is one of the hardest and most difficult things in life, I think, to have the balance, because you need both things. And I wanted to ask you, actually, would you say that if we're to subsume everything that you said, that classicism is that which ultimately has the same substance at its core, but can manifest itself in different forms?
I think that's one way of thinking about it, and that's probably a more useful way of thinking about it than just saying, because I've actually I've offended people because people were saying, oh, it's classical realism. And I would say, well, like side size, for example, side size doesn't come, that's not even traditional. That's 20th century American style of drawing. That's not how the barred plates were made. So it doesn't go back very far in history in terms of working optically. And so I think I get hung up on that a little bit, because to me, whether you're copying something or designing something is way more important than whether you make it look pretty or you make it a little more moving. You know what I mean?
Yes.
With grazie versus gesture, like grace versus gesture, Renaissance versus Baroque, Hellenism. I think that's more of like a thing, and you can go either way. But to me, if you have to stage it and photograph it or Photoshop it from photos and then optically do something to do it, I feel like that just gets in the way. And that's not really the spirit of classicism, because the spirit of classicism is that I think it's a designing that happens, and it's a design primarily based on art, secondarily based on nature. And if you're too far outside that tradition, you can't really play the game. And so for me, I don't like when people say I'm classically trained, but what they really mean is 20th century, side size. I think that's a really useful tool, and we teach it. And I think it's a great way to break down values, great way to render, good way to teach accuracy. But to say that's traditional drawing, when they say classicism, I'm hearing traditional drawing, and I'm thinking, no, that's not correct. But really, probably a healthier attitude is that classicism is more of an ideal. It's more of this balance that the artist is striving to strike. And it's not all about narrative the way that maybe animation is about narrative. So in animation, if the story is sad, everything needs to feel sad. If the story is joyous, everything needs to feel joyous. And telling that story is their first goal, is telling in an appealing way. Obviously, they want to sell merchandise, and the characters have got to be cute and all that stuff, right? But story is so the ideal of entertainment art often is story, right? Character and its story. Well, I don't think that's the same with fine art and with traditional
that's more
art.
Contemplative, I would say. It makes you think and meditate and contemplate life and deeper things.
Yes.
They don't need to be heavy necessarily.
That's what I love so much about it. And that's what I can stand in front of an Egyptian sarcophagus for so long. But when I'm scrolling Instagram, it's like a fraction of a second, because the work is so photographic now, and it has to be contrasty. Has to be full contrast. Why? Well, because Instagram's got a white background and every other image is full contrast. So there's no subtlety. You can't do a silver point drawing in a condensed range. Nobody will see it. It's literally happened to me where I posted something with not enough contrast, and the image filters that social media use are so tuned to the high contrast that my lines disappear. I literally cannot post a subtle drawing because their image compression software will destroy the drawing. And so it's almost like we're having to compete on billboards. Like so that's gonna change the art. It's gonna make it loud. It's gonna make it quick. It's about first read, illustration, fashion, sex, all of these things that we know work in advertising. When you only have a second to get their attention, that's what we're doing when we're working on ArtStation or Instagram or obviously TikTok and all these places. And so one concern I have is that beauty, that subtlety, that thing that you probably will only experience if you go to one of the great museums of the world, if you go to an ancient site, that feeling of transformation and transcendence, people aren't getting it. They're basically like, they grow up just like me. They love their comics and their manga and their video games, just like all of us when we're kids. But then there's like this extended adolescence period where they don't move past that. And part of it is economic, right? People don't have economic opportunities. They can't move out of their mom's house. They can't get a job because of the situation that the world is in. And so I feel like there's a bit of like a stunted, extended adolescence, and people they like the same things they like when they were 13 now that they're in their 30s. And there's nothing wrong with entertainment art. And it is art. Like, don't get me wrong on that. But I do feel like there's not this exploration into the world where they're going out and they're trying to find new definitions of beauty and new definitions of craft because they don't have the ability to move around that way. Or they don't live in a country that has great museums, or they're just so addicted to the scrolling and they're so addicted to the bright, contrasty, algorithm-fueled stuff that they're sort of like, they're not getting access to that beauty. And so, not to take away anything, because I love this. I love this stuff. And I just recently read Berserk, and I'm always talking to my students about how much I like Berserk, this manga. And there's always going to be artists who that's their true calling and that's their true passion. They want to tell stories. They want to tell stories to kids. They want to tell stories to adults. They just love that art form. But I feel like the bigger problem is that people aren't being exposed to that bigger tradition. So, I mean, animation is like 100 years old, 120 years old. Us depicting things on walls, us depicting animals in the natural world, that's at least 43,000 years old. Like, it is so much more a part of who we are as humanity.
No, I feel like I have a million questions. I'm sorry for interrupting you. I feel like I have a million questions, but I just have to reduce them to, probably is going to be my last point, because I also wanted to talk about beauty, because that's probably the primary object of classicism. And I really I love what you said, like your experience when you were a child, because I remember somebody asked me something on Instagram, and I said that art for me is almost like I'm perpetuating my childhood, basically, in a sense that it makes me feel young because I have the same excitement that a child has. And it's about the fact that beauty is something that we cannot really define. You have it in Hippias Major in the Platonic dialogues. You have that at the end, like beauty can only be recognized but not defined. We can only talk about beauty asymptotically, basically, which is always tangential to what it actually is at its core, I think.
Maybe. I'm not so sure about that.
I think, yeah, we can give many definitions, but we can't give an exhaustive, like complete definition of what it actually is in that sense, because we can say what beauty is. And it's amazing that you said that you naturally were attracted to these beautiful works of art that are life-changing. Because if you see reality with unfiltered eyes, if you're not, let's say, indoctrinated to think in a certain way, naturally see these things and, we recognize this is beauty. This is it. This is what I want. And I heard this experience from many other people who are not that are artists, but they're interested in this part of this, let's say, in the classical aspect of the arts.
Yeah.
So, it's really, truly emotional, because today people, as you said, they either don't have the resources, or it's also something that is hard to digest, I think.
Yeah.
Because entertainment art is something with immediate response, like it gives you pleasure, entertainment. It's almost like fast food. And when you see La Pieta, for instance, it makes you think about things that are not necessarily comfortable.
It's definitely a different kind of experience to see it stand in front of the Pietà, Michelangelo's Pietà at St. Mark's. But that doesn't mean that the experience of being entertained is not. It's just different. It's like a different.
It's different. I mean, they're both necessary.
They're both art.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're both art, but the feeling is so different, because when you see a great masterpiece like that, it makes you like think about reality and yourself and your place in history and human potential and all of these things. And then when you're watching Harry Potter, you're thinking, oh, that's cool. I hope Harry gets to do this new spell. I wonder what's going to happen next. And I know people emotionally connect very much with stories and with these things, and their stories are very powerful. And I feel like superheroes are the new Greek gods, and Harry Potter are the new myths. And as people move away from religion in modernity, I think they need some like stories to fill that gap and fill that way, in a way for them to define themselves and to understand themselves. So I don't want to take anything away from the power of storytelling. It's just as ancient. I mean, art predates writing, but it's just as important for the human soul, or whatever you want to call it.
You need both.
But at the same time, like when it comes to art and when it comes to craft, like there are levels to the game, and I feel like most young students have no idea how well Albrecht Dürer could draw, because stylistically, it's just like, oh, I don't know, that's weird, that looks old, that's Christian, or they're like, oh, well, this is colonialism. Maybe they politicize everything. Oh, this is colonialism, or this is this kind of stuff is really just one culture taking from another culture. They have smart ass things that they kind of use as excuses to not go deeper into what is the deepest well and what they can really, I think, draw the most water out of. And it doesn't have to take anything away from any other kind of art they love. They can love doing, fan art with, large-breasted manga girls, and they can love that, and then they can also love Bernini. Like, there's just more things to love, you know what I mean? There's no reason they have to give up the things they like in order to appreciate the more traditional stuff. And so I hope more people do that.
Yeah, it's the balance. I don't know how it sounds in English, what is the correct word, but you have these two views, the Dionysian and Apollonian view of the world. Somehow, you kind of need both. You need to enjoy life to its fullest, but you also need to be contemplative. Think about.
And that's the same in the Eightfold Path in Buddhism, right? It's so many different cultures talk about that balance, right? Like, we are humans. We have human needs. We need to speak to each other. We need to be heard. There's all kinds of things that we need as people. But then there's also there's deeper, more subtle yearnings, and those yearnings I think those operate on a longer. It's sort of like love. It's like some people be like, "Oh, I'm fine. I don't want to be in a relationship," or whatever it is. But over the years, you know what I mean. Your opinion change. You can realize, no, I want to be in a relationship, or I want to be loved, or I want to have that intimacy with somebody else. And I feel like on some level, art's like that too. There are different types of forms of art you can appreciate, but there are some forms of art that, like when listening to Passion of Matthew by Johann Sebastian Bach, I feel like that. Like, I could listen to that piece of music 1,000 times, and every time I listen to it, I hear something more. I also like Michael Jackson or Johnny Cash, and I can listen to them all week long. But at some point, it's like, okay, dude, that's enough. I can't listen to anymore.
They're not real opposites in a sense.
They're not,
they're very different, but that difference doesn't imply opposition.
Yeah, but there is a subtlety and a depth. There is something to the craft of the ancients that is ahead. It's better, and I want to make that statement because that's an unlikable statement. Like, that's going to make people listening to this like me less, but it has to be said. And I don't think that you can appreciate that unless, one, you've really studied this art, and two, you've attempted to do it and you've achieved a certain level. Because the better I get at drawing or modeling or sculpture, the better Leonardo is to me, and the less impressive Andrew Loomis is to me. The more I study sculpture, the higher the Greeks go, and the lower Bridgman goes. And these are all really good. So you really can't tell the difference of ability until you yourself start walking that path, which sounds like circular logic. It's almost like a religious loophole or something, but it's actually true. Like, you probably don't know how good of a boxer Muhammad Ali is unless you box. You know what I mean? There's that element to it too. And so this idea that, look, art is just a preference, like whatever you want, no shame in your game, you go. That's an attitude that, like, personally I can get behind. Like, that's how I am. I don't care. Like whatever you like. But if we're being serious about this, if we're really being serious, there's no sculptor alive today who's half as good as Bernini. That's just, I 100% believe that because of the technical abilities that he had. They're unbelievable.
I liked an
He's so much better
expression that I just read in a book about Bernini's aesthetical heroism, and I think there's no better sentiment to describe his art. It's like heroic in aesthetics. It's absolutely out there. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I had the experience myself. I remember like one of the most recent ones is I never really liked Rembrandt. It's the atmosphere. It's not that I mean, he's amazing as an artist. But once I started to delve deeper into pen and ink drawing, and I studied his drawings, I can't believe how incredible they are, and how hard it is to achieve that skill.
That's a great example, because a lot of the students, like, they admit, they're like, I don't know if I like Rembrandt. It's like, yeah, because he's making his figures frumpy, short, ugly, overweight, lumpy. But that's a statement about the impurity of the human soul and the light. I mean, Steve Houston talks about this on New Masters Academy. But that light that comes in, that divine light, is pure and elevating. And even though we're flawed mortal vessels, there is a beauty and there is a perfection in this world, and whether it's a religious statement or whatever, but you don't get that when you first see it. You just see, oh, these are like ugly little frumpy people, like Grunwald, same thing, Albrecht Dürer, same thing. And so we don't study some of the greatest artists that ever lived, because we just like, oh, I don't like that. You know, this character doesn't look like Sephiroth. I like my characters to be 10 heads tall, with long gray hair, a huge sword. It's a childish immaturity that gets in the way of a greater beauty. And I think it's probably the same with a lot of craft, not just art. I'm sure it's the same with music. I'm sure it's the same with narrative and storytelling. I'm sure they're all having the same arguments where they're like, okay, this is entertaining, but what, can we go deeper? And there's always going to be somebody. There's always going to be a Roger Scruton or a Juliet Aristides or somebody out there talking about beauty. And then there's always going to be other people feeling like it just needs to be opened up, and we shouldn't judge, and we shouldn't put art above others.
Yeah, I actually quoted Roger Scruton when I said about the aesthetic heroism of Bernini, now that I think about it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't actually know Roger. I only know him through Juliet, but I'm not as familiar with his work. But I know that there are like champions for beauty, and there are like champions for this stuff. And I think that that's always going to happen. There's always going to be people trying to push for what they think is, a greater goal, and then people sort of pushing to let's just do the things we're interested in, and not make it that way. But if we truly move to this position, I mean, look, AI. I don't know if we want to get into the subject, but
it's going to be such a
the world's changing so fast, and if we don't know why we do art, and we can't say what we think good art has, what qualities, then we're in big trouble. Because just doing whatever, like, because most people are just learning this way. They get on they play video games and watch anime. They have stuff they like. Then they decide at some young age that they want to try making their own. So they trace the character, but then they change the style. And then, okay, this is my original character now. And they post it on DeviantArt. And then other people post theirs. And then, so it becomes very much like a fandom extending into an identity as an artist. And then they get on YouTube. And then there's how to render your manga character and how to do eyes. And then all this teaching that really is only dealing with a very narrow, very shallow thing, and the teachers themselves are no masters.
That's the paradox of knowledge. You become you get into a niche of a niche of a niche of a niche, and then you end up knowing everything about nothing.
Exactly. Yeah, they know everything exactly. So they end up knowing absolutely everything there is to know about absolutely nothing. Like, they're experts on but they're just missing the bigger tradition of art, because no one's necessarily telling them.
Yeah, like, you don't see the forest from the trees, basically. You end up in that kind of situation. Very classic.
I don't want to detract from any art that anybody loves. I know I keep saying that, but that's really important to me. Like, I want to be able to distinguish that there are higher aspirations, and there is a bigger tradition, and there is a deeper way, and that path is more challenging. But I think personally it's more rewarding. But I don't want to take anything away from these other art forms, because it's not up to me or you or anybody to tell somebody what they can love. And the more art there is to love, the better. I just hope that people continue to draw from the deeper well, because I think that's really our heritage. And everybody I don't care what country you're from or what your background is. That tradition is all of ours. Ancient Egypt, that's probably is so influential on everything that came after it, that's Africa. You know what I mean? I know it's got somehow turned into Western, and I don't want to get into all that, but it's literally East influences West, West influences East. It's African, it's American, it's all of the stuff combined. And I'm really interested in that grander tradition. I'm interested in all of it and how these aesthetics spread throughout the world. But I just feel like people, the average young artist, maybe somebody watching this, they're just not even paying attention to that because nobody told them to. So I just want to like get people excited about that, as opposed to saying, "Oh, this art's higher than that art," because that's what they did in the Bauhaus. They were like, "Oh, conceptual art's higher, decorative art is lower." It says who? You know what I mean? There's things that are more divine about decoration and abstraction than there are about your trompe l'oeil here. So who are you to say that? So I definitely don't think we should be doing that game where we say certain art forms are better than others. And so I don't want any of that to be misconstrued.
If I told you to conclude with one sentence about why people should go to New Masters Academy, what is one? What is the most valuable thing that you give people in New Masters Academy?
So, New Masters Academy. Well, it's everything we've just been talking about, this is the educational answer that we've come up with. So there's really just nothing else like New Masters Academy. I mean, it's affordable. It's an entire art education. It's structured. It's interactive. There's a community. We teach comics. We teach animation. We teach illustration. We teach all of it. We teach anatomy. I'm one of the teachers there. We teach sculpture and carving and composition, and we teach some art history. There's so much we offer, but it is from this sort of like bringing together the best ideas from around the world. Whether it's the Russian academic method, we're adding Chinese ink painting.
That's incredible.
It's really like it's the only resource like it. And so if you're not part of that community, whether or not you have money to spend on your education, the Discord community is free. You should definitely come and get involved because it's a very supportive, loving, creative movement, and it's in my opinion it's the best and education option in the world. I think you're going to learn more going to New Masters Academy than you are going to any art school or any atelier in the world. And people who have gone to them also say that. I mean, you just read the testimonials. It's thousands of people saying, "I went to art school. They didn't teach me how to draw, even though it was a top art school. I'm finally learning more in my first month at New Masters than I learned in 4 years." Like, there are so many testimonials like this. And group accounts like Disney Animation Studios, Ringling, Art Center, a lot of these institutions, Games Workshop, they use New Masters Academy to train their people and to train their professionals. And so it's really, I think, something that every artist should, if they're learning, they should come to New Masters. There's really no reason not to.